Talk about retrograde planets. What exactly gets interrupted and strengthened? Do you realize they're different for each of the 12 ascendants? This is just a sliver of the deeper transit work that you need to know how to do. So I break all that down in this video. Hey, it's Sam, and I'm making this quick video to talk about retrograde planets in general, and how to evaluate retrograde planets. Now, I've been doing this for maybe 10-15 years this way, and it's one of the most accurate, if not the most accurate, approach I've ever seen in specifically knowing what to expect from retrograde planets. As I say, I've been teaching it this way for a long time, and I find it to be really accurate. First thing to understand is that when planets are retrograde, of course, it's a relative motion based on where it is in relationship to the Earth. So, for example, when planets are closer to the Earth, that's when they appear to be moving retrograde, due to the different speeds of the Earth and the planet in question. So when the planet is retrograde, it's actually closer to the Earth, it's larger in the sky. When you look up in the sky, it's bigger. And this is very important. So it appears to be moving backwards, but it's also very big and prominent in the sky. So what does this mean? Well, it means that it becomes a very prominent force. And again, I hesitate to put things in pejorative terms like, well, it's good or it's bad. Again, this is the death of intelligence, is judgment and this kind of polarizing. And, because there's the old thing, well, I heard, retrograde is bad in Western, but it's good in Vedic. Which one is it? Good or bad? Of course, that's the typical way. Rather than look at it as good or bad, it's important to understand what's good and what's bad, right? And we can first start, again, with the astronomy and the understanding of the phenomena itself. It's closer to the Earth. And because it's closer to the Earth and the different speeds between the Earth and the planet, it appears to move backwards. These are the two things. So, of course, something being closer is going to make it more prominent, more noticeable. But it appears to move backwards relative to the speed of Earth and relative to our life on Earth, which is unfolding at a certain speed. Whether you know it or not, your life is unfolding at a certain speed. And that is, the Earth is turning, 24 hours it turns once, it's moving around the sun, 365 days it takes to go around the sun, and time is moving forward on the Earth. Okay? But all of your karma doesn't happen on the Earth, for example. What I mean is that, again, if you think that you're just this hunk of meat walking around who was born at a certain point and then is going to die at another point, then your life is pretty stressful, okay? Things like astrology take us out of just this linear time and connects us to multi-dimensions, a multi-dimensionality of time itself, and also of the different spiritual dimensions and the different lokas and the different gunas and different energetic bodies within our own existence. So that might sound like a bunch of new age mumbo jumbo, but it's not. Your body is moving forward on Earth. It's going to die one day. And the things that you do with your body, like the activities that you engage in on this Earth, also, we want them to move forward. We want them to be successful. We want them to be good. We want good things to happen. When we do something, we want it to be successful. We want to understand it. And this is what gets disrupted when the planet is retrograde. Because our life on Earth is moving forward, and therefore the things we want, and I say our life, I mean our physical life, the things we engage in, the things that we want to have success at, are the things we would say that's moving forward. But the planet is not moving forward at either at that time if we're evaluating a transit, or in the natal chart if we're evaluating the natal chart. Again, there's also different layers of things. Retrograde planets in natal charts become that kind of energy, where its energy tends to be somewhat confusing about how to move forward with that thing, how to manifest that thing in the world. And then at certain points in time, a retrograde planet might be right on one of our natal planets, or, what have you. So everything has to be evaluated, and evaluated as a different, principle or example. But what we're saying now is you just want to understand the idea. So given that we're living on a physical life, and the retrograde planet, it brings intelligence and wisdom and power and a certain brightness into our life based on not moving forward easily. So let me give a more concrete example. So again, as I said, it's closer to Earth, so it's very bright, but it's not moving as fast as our life on Earth is, or in fact, it's even moving backwards. But that motion tends to be a force of light and intelligence and wisdom. We learn a lot with the retrograde planet. That's why it's good. So the good thing about the retrograde planet is we wind up learning a lot about that force, but the way we wind up learning it is because what the thing is doing in our world is not unfolding very smoothly, so we have to pay a lot of attention to it. Okay? So a good example, I have two examples that I use. It's like when you're driving in a car and let's say that you and your friends are driving somewhere. Let's say that you're going to drive, like I live in San Diego, let's say I'm going to drive to LA. And I have a car that goes 70 miles an hour, but my friend's car only goes like 50 miles an hour. Okay? Well, at some point, maybe I'm going to decide to pass them on the road. When I pass them on the road, it's actually going to look like they're moving backwards. They're not actually moving backwards, it's just that I'm moving faster. And let's say that I can't get into the hotel until they arrive. So even if I move past them, we have hotel reservations and they have the key. So I can't get into the hotel until they get there anyway. So as fast as I might want to go, I still got to wait for them, right? This is kind of what the retrograde planet does. Even though our life is moving faster, we have to slow down and keep paying attention to that thing. I have to keep looking in my rearview mirror to see where the people are in the slower car, because I'm not going anywhere until they show up anyway. So again, if we want the thing from the retrograde planet, let's say it's retrograde Jupiter, if we want a child, which is what Jupiter produces in its form, we're going to have to deal with his delays and the fact that he's moving slower. And that's going to teach us something about children and inspiration and Jupiter lessons, because that's what the child brings into our life. And we're not going to have the child until the Karaka gives it. And we're going to have to deal with the delays and the setbacks and the slow-moving car with the retrograde planet, right? And so we have to keep giving it attention. The other example that I use, I use the example of putting a key in a lock, right? When we come home, let's say you have a key and you put it in the door and you open the lock. You don't ever pay attention. You don't really look closely at the key. You just put it in, you turn the lock, you go in. But let's say that something is jammed in the lock or something breaks with the key and you try to put it in, it doesn't work. Then you actually examine it really closely. You look really closely at the lock. You look really closely at the key. And you examine it in great detail when it stops working. So this is also what happens when something stops working in our life. We examine it in a great, with great detail, and therefore learn a lot about that thing. So this is also akin to all problems in life, and a kind of general framework that you can look at or notice with all sort of difficult things or stressful things shown astrologically. They make us pay a lot of attention to it. But more so, I use the example mainly with the retrograde planet because it is something that we examine a lot, where some things that don't play out very well in our astrology chart, we don't examine them very closely either. We kind of neglect them. But with the retrograde planet, we don't neglect it. We actually really look at it closely. We look at it very closely. And again, because it's very bright. It's bright in our consciousness. We pay a lot of attention to it. But we pay attention to it because its indications get interrupted. But again, you want to understand, not all of its indications. Again, the planets work through all three gunas, all three different levels of existence, through spirit, mind, and body. Body, mind, spirit. And the planet is really, on the spirit and the mind level, is very powerful, actually. This is where it's very prominent, because it's very bright. It's a bright force in our mind and consciousness. We pay a lot of attention to it. Again, you can even just notice this when you look up in the sky and you see a retrograde planet, it gets your attention. It's brighter than it is at any other time. Every year, Jupiter goes retrograde for 4 months. Saturn goes retrograde. Mars goes retrograde every couple years, right? And when they're retrograde, they're very bright. We're like, wow, look at that. So it's the same way in our consciousness with retrograde planets. We put a lot of emphasis on it because of the things backing up. But what exactly gets backed up? Because as I just said, we actually learn a lot about that thing. So if Jupiter's retrograde, a person will actually become quite philosophical. They'll pay a lot of attention to Jupiter things because finding teachers and gurus and children and inspiration doesn't necessarily come so easily. And so those interruptions and the lack of hope and the disappointment that might come makes a person pay a lot of attention to that thing and find it within themselves. Because this is the other thing about the retrograde planet, is it's backing up in our consciousness. As our life is moving forward, we have to keep looking at it. Just like the example I used, we have to keep looking at that car that's moving slowly to see if it's, where is it? It's not keeping up. So the retrograde planet becomes a very introspective energy. Again, you can use the example of having the child. If we want to have the child with the retrograde Jupiter, for example, and by the way, it's not always that simple, but often it is. Often when people have a retrograde Jupiter, even if the act of having a child comes easy, the emotional decision or the awareness to want to have it, or that is confusing. There's confusion around that thing, and you have to introspect about it. Like, do I really want this? And you reflect about it a lot. So it becomes a very reflective energy. Of course, Saturn is retrograde almost half the time. So this also really shows that Saturn areas of life, we're supposed to be reflecting on them almost half the time, right? So its energy becomes very spiritualized in that sense, but externally it becomes interrupted. But what becomes external? What becomes interrupted? Well, the two things that the planet produces. Its nature as a karaka, or an indicator, like Jupiter for children, Venus for partners, Mars for siblings or battles. And then what it rules as a house lord. So that would mean, again, like for a Taurus person, Mars rules the 7th and the 12th house, which has to do with partners and relationships as well. So not only would Mars for a Taurus person that's retrograde create disruptions with siblings, because Mars is the karaka of siblings, but also partners, because Mars rules the 7th house. So these would be the things that get disrupted. As you can see here on this screen, this is actually from a course that I taught, and I'm sort of talking about that a little bit here. I'm giving this course away as a bonus. This was a very intense course, the most comprehensive course on retrograde planets I've ever seen. It's hours and hours, like 7-8 hours of classes. where I not only talk about the planets in general and as karakas, but also as house rulers. So you can see, Mars as siblings, competitors, strength. This becomes difficult when Mars is retrograde. Mercury, others in general, discrimination, communication. Jupiter, teacher, children, those who inspire us, a sense of meaning. These become confusing things when the planet is retrograde in the natal chart and when it's retrograde in the sky, if it's a transit. Venus, lovers, beloveds, those who want to share happiness with, and happiness in general. Saturn, old people, authority figures, those beneath us. Time, right? So this is the manual from the retrograde planets course. Mars. So courage, discipline, and focusing on personal strength will be supported and developed. This will come as a result of doubting the use of excessive force and will externally. So when Mars is retrograde, confusion arises around sibling-type relationships and competition. When they are defeated by these externally, a great need to reflect and find the true source of strength arises, right? So that's Mars as a karaka. Of course, the same thing would be if it's the example of Mars as the seventh lord. Confusion arises around partnerships and compromise. And when we don't give enough or we give too much, we reflect on that and it creates confusion. So that's Mars. So I go through every planet. Mercury, developing discrimination, communication, and greater flexibility, will be supported and developed with retrograde Mercury. So it's eventually supported and developed, but the support comes from feeling misunderstood by others, like we're not speaking clearly. Becomes apparent that others' misunderstandings are a result of not speaking clearly, being able to adjust or accommodate their views, bringing awareness and reflection on improving communication. Again, if Mercury rules the 10th house, like let's say it's for Virgo or Sagittarius, then we also see these interruptions in the workplace, etc. So again, in the course on retrograde planets, I talk about each of the planets as karakas, but then I get into every sign. So you see, then I go through Aries. Retrograde Mars brings confusion over the very identity of Aries, as he's a ruling planet. Also, the Ram's ever-changing and transforming identity, because Mars rules the 1st and the 8th house. Retrograde Mercury brings confusion over how to skillfully navigate life's problems and difficulties without making enemies, because Mercury also rules the 6th house. And Mercury is also the clever intelligence because Mercury is the 3rd lord, right? Gemini, let's say retrograde Jupiter, confusion around responsibilities, career, and relationships, as Jupiter rules these 2 important houses for Gemini, including Jupiter as the karaka. So I go through each of the 12 signs in the course as well. And then I talk about retrograde planets and the houses when retrograde planets transit the houses. So again, this is in the sky, but again, if you have one of these planets setting up someplace in your natal chart, particularly one of the slower moving transits, then it's quite impactful. Like, for example, if you got a retrograde planet going through your 1st house, again, that's a big deal, right? That has a lot of impact. Through the 2nd house, one may slide on their diet or improve it, get sudden attack of potty mouth when retrograde planets transit the 2nd house, like Rahu going through your 2nd, or Mars. That's just a transit. But if it's a retrograde planet, let's say it's Mars or it's Saturn, you might doubt your speech. If it's Saturn, if it's Mars, you might get into some battles or struggles, when it goes retrograde, etc. So again, all of these things are gone over in great detail in the retrograde planet course. And then I have a bunch of case studies as well. These are a couple example charts, and I have a whole section where there's many case studies as well. So this is just a free bonus for my upcoming planetary transits course that I'm doing. It's a Zoom video course that I'm doing, and that will be available to all. And I'm going to break down how to analyze transits in relation to dasha cycles, how to not just aspect the exact location of transits, but aspects by transit, and how to know when the transit is delivering the result, when it's the dasha, how to really, dial in the exact, precise predictions that you can make, how to know how much importance and the ratio to give to the transits to dasha planets, the dasha planet in transit. And again, a lot of case studies. It's not just going to be theory. It's going to be looking at chart after chart and seeing these things really come out, so that when you read charts and you try to do readings, you're not just, shooting in the dark and like, well, which one is it? The transit says this, the dasha says this. How do I know? Again, because some of the real important, indicators or cycles are shown. A transit is different than a dasha. A planetary dasha lasts the length of the dasha, but the transit is more limited, but it's going to show something in a different measure. So again, I'm also going to break down other technical details that you have to know, like, for example, cycles. Like we talk about, the annual cycle, which is what we celebrate on our birthday, which is a solar return, but we also have a Mars return every 2 years, Jupiter return every 12 years, Rahu transits every 18 years. Of course, the Saturn return every 20 to 30 years, and then these cycles also coincide. So again, every 12 years of a Jupiter cycle, there have been 6 Mars cycles. Again, what does that mean? So all of this stuff is really important, and most people don't think about it or think about time in general and how to evaluate time and understand cycles within cycles. So I'm looking forward to doing that. It's going to be live, but it's also archived, live video through the Zoom platform, where you can show up. Again, if you can't attend live, then you can get the recordings. They're archived forever, but you'll see me teaching, and you'll see transits come to life. You'll have your whole life to, watch these video trainings. Again, it's even better than going to conferences where you go and watch a presentation once and never see it again. So this online format, you shouldn't take it for granted. Oh, webinar, yeah, okay, whatever. Look, people spend hundreds, thousands of dollars by the time they get to a conference, and they watch the class once and they never see it again. These are, first of all, you don't have to fly to a conference. You can just watch in real time on your computer and interact live as well. Interact with some of my senior students and with me, ask your questions live. But then you also have the recordings that you can watch and learn from for the rest of your life. So it's a great investment, a great way to learn. So this retrograde course, which is usually $97, is a bonus. So and it's available right now because the course starts in March. But if you're seeing this before, then you get access to the Retrograde Planets course right now. And again, this is the most comprehensive course I've ever seen on retrograde planets. Very comprehensive manual, not just retrograde Mars in general, but retrograde Mars for every ascendant, because it's different for every ascendant. Mars is the 6th and 11th house ruler if you're Gemini. That's a totally different retrograde planet than for Leo, where he rules the 4th and the 9th house. And yes, these things matter enormous. In fact, this is the whole subtle nuance of transits as well. Planets by transit are also house rulers by transit. Planets by transit also form yogas by transit. And they form yogas with each other through aspect. And again, this is the very deep stuff that you're not learning, I know, because nobody teaches it. And it's not like I'm bragging, but I know because I see what other people say. Nobody's teaching this. No one's teaching, especially other things like double aspects by transit, triple aspects by transit. These things are really important. And I've been doing this for 15 years. And the Vedic astrology texts are pretty scant when it comes to transit work. It's like the Gochara system and then Ashtaka Varga, which were kind of extrapolated from each other. But then there's a whole system called Tajika, where it's more developed, but this is a kind of hybridization of that and just years of experience, and it's really accurate. So anyway, I don't want this to get much longer, but I'm making this video because the course is upcoming. This Retrograde Planets course is the most comprehensive I've seen. It's a bonus that you can get now. And you'll have all this material for the rest of your life to really understand how to dial in transits, how to work in all the important nuances of rulerships, of karikas, of even retrograde. This is why I gave the retrograde course as a bonus, because of course they're they're definitely related, but all of the deep inside work that we're also going to be doing on the transits weekend course. So anyway, I hope this was helpful.